Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Fireplace Conversations for 2025. This is our first session for the year, our famous now winter series of the Fireplace Conversations. And today we are talking all things governance, national governance, and how that translates to organizational governance. And tonight I'm joined by our very own directors. We have our chairperson, Mr. Desmond Nicanor, the deputy chairperson, Mrs. Ernestine Tuneko, and our former chairperson, but still our own director, Steve Galloway. And so I'm going to have them introduce themselves shortly. So before we get into the questions, please introduce yourself, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Edla, and good evening, everyone. Good evening to everybody at home. My name is Desmond Nicanor. I'm the current chairperson of the NICG. I'm a strategist by profession, by trade, but I'm a governance, I wouldn't say expert, and a governance enthusiast at this current point in time. So I've been leading the NICG for around 6 months or so, and it's been a wonderful journey. We really look forward to just discussing all matters governance, local and international. Thanks.
Thank you, Desmond. Ernestine.
Hi, good evening, our viewers. My name is Ernestine Tuneko. I'm the current deputy chairperson of the NICG. I'm a lawyer by profession, and I've served in capacities as a legal advisor and company secretary for a few public enterprises.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Galloway.
Good evening, everybody. I've started out my life as a geologist. I'm now a pensioner, and I've been through about every other profession in the last 40 odd years. I've served on boards for more than 20 years.
Yeah.
And for the last 15 years, I've been on a number of diverse boards, including chairing a number of those boards.
Mm-hmm.
I've just stepped down as chairman of NICG, but I'm very happy still to be a director, as long as you will have me here.
Yes, no, please, do not leave me. I must say, I need to apologize because today is Europe Day, and so we have a bit of a clash today. So we had to cancel our attendance with the EU to be here. So we apologize, and we hope those who are there are having fun and that they can tune in later. So thank you to the audience that's here, the small audience that's here. We are happy to have you here. So we're getting started. I'm going to start with you, Steve, and just ask you, like, what recent reforms or practices give you great optimism for governance in Namibia?
I'm glad I can start on a positive note.
Yeah.
Because, yes, I think the recent reduction in cabinet is really incredibly significant.
Yeah.
I think the reduction by half of cabinet is a very bold move. And I think it's going to lead to a lot of governance improvement, consolidation of different functions. Of course, there will be gaps, and we can talk about those gaps. Mm-hmm. But I think it's a really bold move, and I've scored it 9 out of 10.
All right, Judge. Thank you. Do you want to add to that? What do you think? Greatest reforms?
I think in terms of how they're going to perform, obviously it's too early to tell. Mm-hmm. But I think a new administration brings about new hope. We have a new cabinet, so we have new ideas, people who want to perform and want to really be impactful as fast as possible. So we're looking forward to, faster implementation of projects, okay, and new implementation of policy. So that's exciting.
Okay. All right, thanks. Desmond, what makes you optimistic?
Yeah, I'm a serial optimist, so there's a lot to smile about. But I think there's a few things that are really worth us being proud of as in our context, governance-wise. And one thing that I've seen, perhaps I wanted to touch on some of the things that Steve and Ernestine raised, but I think one of them that I can really bring up now is really the transparency and the wide-reaching nature of how we are filling our state-owned enterprise boards.
Okay.
I think generally the obscurity has been lifted to quite a large extent.
Okay.
And the crop of professionals that we are the Department of Public Enterprises can access to serve on these boards is really getting wider and deeper and filled with quality.
Okay.
And it's even pleasing to see that these processes are done in a very transparent, very public way,
Okay.
I think that's a good step.
Okay.
I think it's a really good
Yeah.
step in the right direction.
Yeah. Because let's bring in the next question, even to Steve. So Steve, to you, I want to ask why the reduction in cabinet is a great, it's a good thing. And then I think to Desmond, I want to, maybe talk about, because people still complain about the fact that it's the same people that get recycled. So is the main thing just that it's transparent now, or do you think the actual process itself is good? And maybe keep that in mind as we go to the next question when we talk about what are the largest governance gaps.
All right. The reason I think it's great is it provides so much more focus. We sort of created more and more ministries, and it was almost as though we were creating ministries for people. And I think the political events that unfolded made it quite convenient to cut the size down and to consolidate a number of functions into clusters.
Right.
I do think there's some gaps, which we can talk to later, but I think the accountability that's provided by clustering a number of similar activities under one minister, and not having all of these deputy ministers, but only a couple of deputy ministers when we need them, it provides huge accountability.
Okay.
And I think the scorecards that have been put up right up front with deliverables in 3 months are going to focus individuals on doing what they have to do, and on highlighting what's making it difficult to do what you have to do.
Right.
So I think the focus is tremendous, and it really provides an opportunity for us to be performance-based for change.
That's really good.
No, I think on your earlier point, my comment dovetails into that. You asked around, are there the same faces circulating in that space? I think there is merit to that notion, but I think it's also early days in terms of our new approach. So I would say give the department or directorate, the department time, because what I am seeing now is that the pool is deepening. You've noticed that the recent appointments, especially at the commercial SOE level, have really been independent, non-executive directors in the true sense of the word.
Nice.
So I think it's early days. I think that will still unfold, and then we'll have a lot more diversity. But nonetheless, it's a good direction.
Okay. Do you want to add to that? You're good in terms of governance gaps. Okay. So still on national governance, I wanna look at some headlines. What are some headline failures that we still need to learn from? Desmond, do you want to start that off for us?
Okay, no problem. Yeah, I think once again, in all things, there's a lot we can improve on, and one that comes to heart, and I probably say this in my individual capacity because I feel that it's something that I just thought there was so much opportunity in, was perhaps the Namibia Statistics Agency matter. I think in Q3, Q4, 2024. Where there was a warranted public outcry for the agency to perhaps at least consider some of the elements or the points that the public at large were bringing to the table. And I think why I say it's perhaps a missed opportunity was for an agency that is so strategically important because it underpins most of our strategic decisions. It was a welcome moment where they were not necessarily operating in obscurity, but they were at the center of public and national discourse. I feel that response could have been perhaps more either explanatory of their mandate, if anything, or if not, to try maybe adjust past practices. Because, I mean, you can understand the context was different, the political context was different. We're heading into elections, and your main stakeholder, the public, are literally asking for something that you provide for and something that you have. So I think that could have been really an opportunity to grab hold of. But granted, and I always have to put a disclaimer, I'm not also privy to all the details around the matter. But to answer your question, that's my view.
Yeah. Ernestine, what headlines in your case, or no?
I think maybe just to continue on what Desmond was saying, at least in that regard, there is some lesson learned from the NSA, in that at least whether it's the right time or not, they disclosed that information that the public really needed. And I think from that point of view, it's something that we then take on and then we use to at least come up with policies and interventions that are required to address those shortcomings, which is obviously youth unemployment, which is obviously, yes, we learn from it.
Okay. Steve, do you want to bring a couple? I'm sure you have a couple.
Yeah, I've got quite a lot. And, the one immediately goes to the headlines that have been in the newspapers around fish rot, diamond rot, and the general
Timber rot.
rot that has happened around resources.
Yeah.
And I haven't chosen those because those are sort of incremental. And if you look back at why those happened, all of the resource-related failures, if you like, they were incremental, and they came for 10 years or more. The one that I've chosen as the sort of headline failure, which didn't necessarily hit the press, was on that fateful day of the 30th of August 2016, when we passed NEPA, the Namibian Investment Promotion Act, in Parliament. And it's an act. People refer to it as a bill. It was passed by Parliament, by however many people stood in Parliament. I can't remember what the number was at the time. And it really, if it had been brought into force, and the only thing that stopped it being brought into force was the Minister of Trade and Industry was prevailed upon to not sign it into force. And that act, NEPA, would have brought the economy to its knees. It was incredibly draconian. It was over-regulatory. It provided unfettered powers and discretion to one minister, the Minister of Trade, and it literally was potentially capturing the economy. Thankfully, we saw the folly of our ways. But what worries me, and the reason I brought it up, is that, let's say it was 96 parliamentarians signed it off.
Yeah.
And the problem there, like with the fish and like with some of the resources issues, is that there were too many vested interests.
Yeah.
People sitting in those halls with vested interests who were looking at their own positions rather than looking at the national good.
Yeah.
And that one act, which has still not been implemented, by the way, it's still been kept as a bill, if you like, was an act that wasn't brought into force, is holding back Namibia as a competitive nation to attract investors and to really get ourselves on the front foot, where so much else is good, so much of our general governance framework in Namibia is good, starting from our constitution. But for 8.5 years, we've been held hostage because of that one headline issue, which we haven't taken seriously.
Yeah. Do you have, what do you propose? Like, what do you have in mind? Sorry, just while we're on that. And I think also another thought is, I know the IPPR, when they discussed, where are they now, and they were talking about the impact of fish rot on the, the lives of the fishermen and things. They brought up the issue that the legislation made it easy for fish rot to happen, and like what has been done with that? Because I don't think anything has been done.
I mean, starting with the Investment Act, then what did happen was a few years later, in November 21. The Namibian Investment Promotion and Facilitation Bill was taken to Parliament just before Christmas. And unfortunately, that was almost as bad as NEPA 5 years earlier. And the tragic part is that a stakeholder group, private and public sector, had in fact drafted a new framework for the Investment Act. And that had been put aside. And the Minister of Trade and Industry then brought forward in 2021 this new promotion facilitation bill, which didn't remedy more than 20% of what was wrong with the first one. So that was what went wrong. Talking about fisheries, yes, the fish rot scandal was because of an incremental erosion of the governance framework around fisheries. We had some similar
issues happening around other resources, but they were never addressed. Even when fish rot was actually uncovered, those issues were not addressed. And we still have a dire need to go back and look at resources governance, all our resources, and never a better time to do so than now, with oil and gas being as topical as it is.
Right.
So we really need to take another sweep and look at all of our resources and see whether the governance
frameworks,
is right for resource allocation across the board.
Yeah.
It doesn't help us taking back half-baked bills or acts and trying to remedy them. We need to go back to square one, and as urgent as it is, we need to go back to the basic principles of what it takes to govern the resources which belong to the people of this country,
Yeah, yeah.
and what it takes to get those resources benefiting the people of this country.
So good. Which brings us, I think, to the next question. Do you want to add to that? No. Because I think it brings me to what we said. As the NICG, we want to promote good governance. So maybe, Mr. Chair, I'll start with you again. Like, how can we best partner with government, with regulators and civil society to drive better outcomes?
No, it's a good question, and it speaks to the heart of what and who NICG is.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll answer it at a very high level, and then I can get into a few specifics. But the best way that NICG can partner with government and other stakeholders is actually to implement and roll out our mandate and in a very detailed and impartial manner. The NICG strategic pillars speak to specific areas that should be addressed, should be given continuous attention rather. We talk about advocacy, thought leadership, capacity building.
Yeah.
And there's so much more. So being a member-based body, we represent a host of entities. Some are state-owned, some are private, some are commercial, some are churches, some are schools. We have a crop of SMEs as members. We have a crop of individuals, as persons as members. So all of these different stakeholders have different needs, but they all boil down to the same thing. So what we would need to do is to just really do what we are called to do in the way that we should be doing it. In other words, being very technically sound, being the custodian and champion of good governance practice. The very least we can do is to make sure that all of those stakeholder hosts, from government to SMEs to individuals, understand what the minimum required, the bare necessities when it comes to good governance should be. And then some around capacity building and adding to university curricula and all of this. So we mentioned around the quality of applicants that are coming onto the fore. A good example would be that the NICG would have to, and it's part of our priorities for this year, step in and make sure that those people that are in the pool, the candidates, are of quality. They have been formally trained and certified to be able to exercise governance at the high level or at a very basic or elementary level. So there's a host of areas that the NICG should can partner with government.
Yeah. I don't see.
Yeah, I think it's important to emphasize that there's a need for the NICG to remain independent, so that we can actually preserve our credibility. And I think you've touched on capacity building, but also policy review, and also always when we talk about the big headlines, creating some public discussion on relevant issues, so that we get the public to actually discuss and actually interrogate certain issues that are not governance that is not being done correctly. So policy review, and also assisting with, I know it's one of our priorities, where we assist with establishing committees or clusters, either whether it's for directors or accountants or auditors or even COSECs, so that they can then come together and see how they can actually improve governance in the country. So that's part of our mandate that we should actually focus on.
Yeah. Steve, do you want to add to that? Or?
Yeah, I think it's, we've been going for 6 or 7 years, and it takes time to build up momentum. But I think NICG's got to the point now, has earned the reputation to be able to really play a stronger advocacy role. And some of that is informal. I would like to see a minister, for example, coming to the NICG and saying, what do you think about the following policy proposals that we're looking at completely anonymously if they want it like that, just as a sounding board to say, what do you think if we were to do the following? I think the NICG must also play that role in the public space when there is a contentious issue hitting the headlines without being emotional or sensationalist. I think the NICG should come up and comment in a very informed, deliberate way about debates that are happening around governance. And I think we should really maneuver ourselves into this trusted position as the custodian of corporate governance in all the areas that Desmond has been mentioning. I really believe that we've earned that position now, and that we need to step up and become a little bit more outspoken and more deliberate in our advocacy.
Yeah. Okay. I think I want to ask maybe if the audience has some questions, because we're talking about us amongst ourselves. So maybe, I don't know if there are any questions in the audience with regards to just governance and the role of the NICG, and what gaps you've seen and things that, you know, that we could contribute to as the NICG. Are there any questions or comments or thoughts, you know, for our audience here? Yeah. Can we get him a roaming mic, please? Please introduce yourself so that our audience can hear.
Sorry. Hello, my name is Eduardo Rodriguez. I'm with Shell, and also a member of NAMPOA, which is the oil and gas operators. So thank you for the invitation, and I applaud the mission of NICG. And as a foreigner, it's something that, you know, one of the many things that I have admired of specific to Namibia about this type of discussions, which I highly applaud. My question, I would like to hear your thoughts. There's a lot of comments of the oil and gas industry and the impact that it will have in Namibia. You know, although we're at an early stages, there's several initiatives that have taken forward. One of them is the draft of the local content policy. So I would like to hear NICG views on this policy, what it will imply, and in your view, what will be a good local content policy for the oil and gas industry?
Yes, it is. It is. Thank you, Eduardo. Steve, will you take that for us, Omar, since you're sharing a mic?
Sure. Thanks, Eduardo. I must say that I haven't read any of the local content policies in detail. I've seen summaries and I've seen highlights. So my comments will be quite general. I think it is a theme that has come through in this whole debate on resources governance, that we need to bring the benefits of our resources, which belong to the people of this country, back to the people of the country. But I get the impression that through simply saying it's local content, we miss the boat a lot of the time. I don't think there's any doubt that we need to look at the entire spectrum and the benefits that accrue to Namibians. And I was involved at Independence, in fact, in drafting the first Oil and Gas Act and the Taxation Act and the Minerals Act and all of that. And we had some very clever consultants who worked with us then, 30 years ago. We didn't get so much into local content specifications then, even though the commitment to getting training, getting institutions that support localization, all of that, was just as prominent then as it is now. We didn't actually draft local content policies. My impression now is that we're focusing perhaps too much just on the activities that relate to your oil and gas, or to hydrogen, or to uranium, or whatever. And that sometimes leads to an unrealistic expectation of what can actually be done. I think if you do it the other way around and you say, this is the value of that resource to the country, and if you break it down into ownership, into taxes, royalties, etc., value chain, breaking down the value chain, and looking at the entire spectrum of where you can add value as a local entity, I think you're going to go a lot further. We seem to misunderstand, and often politicians come out and say, we want 50% of ownership or of local content or whatever. And it's very difficult to relate to that because we don't define what it is. If you say we want 50% of the total benefit to the nation, you can quantify that. And we have a term called government take. And that government take is adding up all the slices of royalties and excise duties and taxes, etc., and coming up with a number as to what the government take is of the resource rent. And the resource rent is all of those benefits that accrue from a particular resource. And if you break it down like that, then I think you get to the right answers. But if you simply say it's local content and we want 50% of all of the activities on your oil and gas rig, for example, it doesn't make sense. And I'm a little bit worried that we're focusing on this concept of local content without defining it very clearly and without looking at that whole spectrum of activities that talk to all of the benefits from the resource that you're looking at.
Okay. Do you want to add to that, or can I? Do you want to?
Anybody has more views?
Yeah.
But I would like to comment.
Yeah.
Maybe I can give my
Yeah.
2 cents and then you can comment.
Yeah.
So, firstly, thanks for the question and also for the comment in the beginning. We appreciate it. I think with the local content policy, I think especially for professionals my age, a little bit young and a little bit older, it has really brought in a huge sense of excitement. If you see, I think the closest example we can use with the Namibian oil and gas story is probably Guyana, who have just recently, they're almost a little bit around a few years ahead of us in terms of their story. Very similar in terms of the scale of the find and the impact that's had on GDP and a whole host of other social economic indicators or factors within their specific country. So with them, they had quite a mixed result. And perhaps my first point is to say it is quite early for us to know whether our local content policy is meeting its need or not. Because much of it, especially when you're looking at how much it increases workforce participation, employment, entrepreneurship, and such, it's a little bit early. I think we are not quite yet in production stage. But you do have, at least it has sparked a entrepreneurial interest with qualified and technical Namibians who are looking out there in the international market to see how they can partner with this very exciting a wave that's coming onto our shores. So I think generally my view is exactly that. I think the start is as good as it can be. It is very similar to what we've seen in, I think, Colombia and Nigeria have had similar. But there will come a time when we'll probably have to tweak it to to Namibia and its particularities. So that's my view. I think it's a good start, but I think there's still a lot more to see until we know whether it's really fit for purpose or not.
Do you want to add?
No.
Okay. Does he have a mic? Okay.
Thank you very much. And Steve, hearing you is like if I was sitting there and answering my point of view, right? So I think it's like preaching to the choir, right? So I think all the things that you mentioned are spot on. And how, I guess my question is, what we want is what's the end goal and what's the vision and what's the big size of the prize. And unfortunately, what I have seen in many countries that I worked is that although it's very simple and logical, trying to overpass that challenge and what do you prefer having, 100% of zero or a rational percentage of billions? And that, as simple as it sounds, implementing it and the political pressure that it has, it's quite hard to do it. And sometimes we get confused in the wrong discussions, and it affects the attractiveness and the competitiveness of the resource holder, which ends up in lower investment and lower chances of success. You mentioned Guyana, and it is important to understand what is the difference with Guyana, no? And where is Namibia compared to it and competitively, and how is it going to attract the investment? So I guess if I look at what we are trying to advocate for in benefit of, at the end, a success case, which is what we are looking for, but to attract more investment, and then hearing you exactly what you say, and we're saying exactly the same thing. How do we work together as NAMPOA, as NICG, and what are the best practices there that we definitely cannot ignore the pressure that it brings politically, the local content discussion, but at the end we have to make sure that how do we drive so that it's a responsible policy that encourages investment so that we get more chances of success, and at the end that those taxes, those royalties, that windfall profit tax, that the after profit tax that Namibia has kicks in, which is where really the benefits comes, and where corporate governance on what do you do with those resources to diversify the economy, that's where the real discussion is. So, so I think it's very interesting to see how all the different stakeholders can work together with a common goal. So, thank you.
Thank you. I see you were nodding your head there. Did you want to add something or ask a question? Okay, no, you're good. Thank you. Mr. Eduardo, I like what you said because it ties into what I was going to ask next in terms of untapped opportunities to influence policy or to build, board capacity. So I don't know, Steve, if you want to add more, or if.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that I thought it's time for us to become more vocal in our advocacy. Mm-hmm. When one talks about advocacy in a very specialized area like this, we've got to be careful. We are not the experts, but we can certainly tap expertise, and with the independence that we must always maintain, I would like to see us being able to speak to the minister or to the president, since the president has taken the unprecedented step of putting oil and gas in her office. Yeah. And I think that's a great move because that focuses all of the expertise and attention at the right place. I don't think it should stay there for very long, but I think it gives her the opportunity to consult widely. Yeah. And I would love the opportunity to go and consult from an independent governance point of view with this sort of collective experience we have, and with being able to tap the sort of people that we tapped at independence. We didn't know very much at independence, but we've learned very quickly from people who knew as much as the oil companies did from their experience around the world. And it's not difficult to get those experts into your midst quite quickly and to present an independent view. So I think we should step up and be heard. We won't have the final word on very technical discussions, but we'll certainly be able to guide the general governance frameworks for extractive industries.
I think you said independent is the key word, and because clearly we're an interested party, so we need independent.
So they want you to say that again in the mic, because then our online viewers can't hear you.
No, that I think that the key word, and where I think you add a lot of value, is you mentioned at the beginning before we asked this, the word independence, right? And you are advocating for what is best for the country. And for sure, we will give all the arguments, but we're an interested party. So we will give our opinions, but we need more independent that contradict the position or favor it and this dialogue is very important to construct what is the best model out there.
Right.
And I truly believe that Namibia is quite different, and it could be a case study to show the rest of the world. So really looking forward for what lies ahead.
That's good. Thank you so much. Thank you for your contribution and for being here. So I think maybe, Mr. Chair, then, with all of this coming up, if we're thinking priorities for the next 12 months, what would it be?
Yeah, it's it's a very important question, and I'll answer it really carefully. I think we need to be aware that we are in quite a delicate stage of the area of public enterprise governance. And the reason why is, if you recall, I think it was in early 2019, and I think Namibia central government took quite a strong step in promulgating or reforming and promulgating a piece of legislation called the Public Enterprises Governance Act, which I won't go into the merits or demerits of the act, but nonetheless, it's a solid framework, a solid piece of legislation at the right levels that almost mandates and enshrines governance. Of course, like any piece of legislation, it has its drawbacks, but nonetheless, it's the direction we took. And I think at the time, the country fundamentally opted to adopt a hybrid model of governance, especially with the really strategic state-owned enterprises. Now, fast forward around 6 years, 2025. So I think in early April, our president announced that obviously that ministry will be dissolved and will almost revert back to the status quo as it was. And this act that I mentioned is going to be, I think, revised. So to get to the point of my answer is that should be a priority for us,
right?
To as NICG, to help and partner with government to help contribute to that transition back. There's been a lot of good ground gained. I think one of the things, I don't think many people know this, but it's very the monitoring and evaluation in terms of compliance of PEGA was really taking up at a very high level. It was not easy to get a strategic, integrated strategic business plan through. You had to really put in good, thorough work. And so I just hope, we are in the position to do a little bit more than hope, that all of those good gains are not lost. So I think it's important that that's a priority. Not only for NICG, but I think for Namibia. I don't think we should roll back on the good grounds that the good things that we've built over the past 6 years. I think we should try just consolidate it and move forward in a very strong manner.
So I think maybe then, speaking of public enterprises, so what are the top 3 governance challenges that face our SOEs?
So, like I said, I'm a strategist by design, by profession. So my view is skewed in that sense. There is a good study, I think, that was done in 2020 by a doctorate student at the University of Namibia, which is really interesting. And he concluded very similar to what I'm about to say. And I think one of probably the biggest issue or challenge is around performance as it relates to the strategic intents of that specific act. So one thing we must always be aware of, a state-owned enterprise is founded by a piece of legislation. And that piece of legislation is very explicit on why this entity exists. It's actually very clear, and it's a strategist's dream, because you don't have to go and reinvent the book when you engage and plan strategically with this type of an entity. Now, if you just do a performance assessment, not around other matters, but just purely around to what extent are these entities meeting the mark in terms of their founding legislation, you'll find that that's not really at where it should be. So I think fundamentally that's the biggest challenge we face, is that we can assess a SOE by a whole host of metrics. We can even look at profitability when the Act says they should actually be prioritizing something completely else, whether it's service delivery or whatever, whether it's water,
mostly
transport, or whatever the case may be. So I think that's a really big challenge. And then second to that, but I think we'll maybe discuss that in another question or so, is just really the governance around it. And I think at that level, the agency problem really shows itself, where there's competing interests,
Right.
competing shareholders, stakeholders, interests, and I think all of that really muddies waters
yeah.
that should be very clear.
Yeah. Other thing.
Yeah, if I can come in there and maybe just pick up from what Desmond was saying, when it comes to strategy, I think there's a bit of shortcomings in some of the public enterprises, at least at board level, in actually understanding or being able to charter a way for the business based on the mandate of the public enterprise, and that actually leaves the organization very aimless. There's no vision, there's no mission. So that's one of the challenges that I see in a lot of public enterprises. But also another one is really it's important that the boards understand their mandate, their function, and really that speaks to knowing where your function starts as a director and where it ends, because management needs to manage, and if you really get into the tussles, it really impacts a public enterprise in terms of how it's managed and governed.
Yeah.
So it's important that they understand their fiduciary duty, that they act in the best interest of the business, and obviously that translates into benefit to the public in terms of really providing the public service that they were mandated to actually provide in terms of their enabling act. So that's really some of the challenges that I've observed.
It makes me now think of, political oversight and how that helps or hinders the effectiveness. So, yeah, can you maybe speak to that?
Maybe just to take, well, I think when it comes to political hindrance or involvement, rather, obviously a line minister serves a purpose. He's actually the shareholder representative for the public, and he then appoints the board of that public enterprise. So there's benefits and also disadvantages. I think it's important that the minister is involved so that he understands what is the law reform that is needed for that public enterprise to actually improve on its mandate and actually serve its public service. It's important. Some public enterprises need financial support. So if the minister is involved, he actually understands what the support is, and he actually can provide it. So that's actually the benefit that you get. Obviously, you also get the interference, in inverted commas, where the minister steps outside his mandate. We've seen a few headlines on that. Like the Midco situation is an example where cabinet enters the realm of appointing a CEO or deciding on who should actually head an SOE. That's not their mandate. So that's where the interference comes in. And as a minister or as a cabinet member, it's important that you understand the mandate you understand your role as a shareholder representative, so that you actually enact the law. So you must actually promote compliance thereof. And also when the hindrance or the interference leads to poor financial performance, then everybody loses, because this public enterprise is not able to perform, and therefore it's not able to provide the public service that is actually mandated to do. So those are some of the consequences of the interference.
Right. Steve, do you want to comment?
Yeah, just this issue of political interference. I think we must remind ourselves all the time that ministers are there serving in a portfolio, serving their state function. They're not there as political appointees.
Right.
And the SWAPO manifesto and the implementation plan that came out of that brings that to the fore every day, because every day now we're hearing the ministers must implement the SWAPO manifesto implementation plan. That is not a national plan. And much as it's got a lot of good stuff in it, that must be transformed into a national plan, like an HPP or a NDP or whatever. So this concept of ministers having to go and take political guidance and then, by extension, interfere with boards with a political mandate is completely wrong. And we need to be very conscious that there's a separation of state and party. There's a lot of very good stuff there, but we really owe it to ourselves to get that into a proper national plan, and for ministers then to only intervene at a policy level where the where it supports the national plan
100%.
and not interfere on daily business, which is what's been happening a lot. So I think that's very clear. That override must stop, and hopefully that's where NICG can play a stronger role to say, Minister, we hear you, but it's not your role to go and interfere where a board is failing. Where the board does fail, and there are cases where the board has failed, the shareholder, whether it be the government shareholder or a private shareholder, whatever, in a private context, has to interfere at some point. But that's only in extreme cases where there's total governance failure. And there I would support ministers getting in and
Right.
taking control if the board has not done it. But the board should then be fired. If the board has failed, the board should be fired, having been overridden. The board shouldn't be sort of pushed aside and then pushed back into place again.
Yeah.
So there's got to be remedial action. If you take the drastic step of shareholder intervention, then the board must be accountable for what they have done or haven't done. You can't have it both ways.
But yeah, because I think that's a challenge, right? Do you want to comment on it? But because I want to add maybe in terms of what can be done better in terms of accountability. Because I mean, we could have the policies, we could have what's right and not, but when that is not adhered to, what accountability is there? Like you said, like the board being fired, or like a CEO just staying for years and years, even though they're not performing.
Just for clarity, from political ministerial level or across, or do you mean for executive and?
I think for on the example that Steve gave now, for a board that completely failed, that should be fired.
Okay. Yeah, I think the political participation is much different to political interference. So I think what Steve mentioned is very important, is that there is a place for the shareholder, the minister, to intervene. And like I said earlier, the PEGA as an act, for all its shortcomings, is quite clear on that. It doesn't leave a lot in terms of ambiguity. So it really, we firstly have to just delineate to make sure that everybody knows who should do what. And me personally, I think that we, as a country, or those role players, are already aware of that. And so it begs the second question or problem, maybe, and I don't have an answer for it, but if the law is so clear, if good governance practice is so clear about where you should intervene and participate and where not, why is it that there is no barrier or deterrence apart from your level of integrity to do so or not? Because that's really the unanswered question. What is the consequence if a minister does not table this to cabinet, even if they have no obligation to do so? Are there any political, social, relational consequences to doing that? And I think that's a much more difficult area to touch on, because I can see, I mean, if I speak really broadly, that is the obvious pain point, is that yes, the act is clear, but there is perhaps, let me say, other consequences that come to play if you do not perhaps toe the line in a certain way. And that's really what is difficult to gather. I think what we should not get into is to say political participation should not be there at all. I think we've seen, I think that's a given. We've seen Singapore and the Temasek Holdings and China and the commanding heights. I mean, it's very clear that at that level, the executive branch of state must provide policy guidance, and they must also avail the national fiscus to do these things that these state-owned enterprises would need to do for the sake of the nation. But there is, if it was a triangle, there is a point where you descend into territories that should not be, and crossing that line and how to avoid it. If I had the answer, I would.
That's the
if
question.
I had the answer, I would written on it.
I don't think you want to add anything.
No.
Yeah.
Perhaps I can just add to that. This, I shy away from this concept of political interference. Political is what the party does. What we're talking about is shareholder intervention, and you can do it in a private sector or in the public sector. I think we must be very careful to differentiate between what cabinet decides should happen and what a minister decides. So the example we're talking about all the time is PEGA.
Mm.
PEGA gives a very clear role to the Minister of Public Enterprises. And the Minister of Public Enterprises must make his interventions and decisions on behalf of the shareholder in terms of that act. He should not be going to cabinet to get instructions, which often contradict his role as the custodian minister. And there are a number of cases like that. So it's not a question of the cabinet or the political sort of override issues. It's a question of the minister in his state role implementing what he's been mandated to do, often by an act of parliament. And cabinet should be made aware that they can't simply override a minister and say, you go and tell that board to do the following things. The minister has to do what he's mandated to do.
Well, we are running out of time. It's such a good conversation. And so, I need to see where we should go next. So what should ministers stop doing? I think we talked about that, in terms of undermining and so on. I think Steve just touched on that really, really well. So maybe what should boards stop doing, or what should they not stop doing to protect public interest?
They must provide the oversight function that they are actually appointed to do. They must not abdicate their responsibilities. They must follow or ensure that they implement or they act in terms of their fiduciary duties. They must keep the interest of the company as paramount and really govern, take accountability, make decisions, and follow what the mandate of the organization is.
Desmond, do you want to add to that? Or?
Yeah, I can maybe add one or two, and I think it's all that. Maybe the only thing I can shed a spotlight on is independence, exercising independence in its truest form. And there's this misconception that you serve at the behest of your appointing authority or officer. And I think even growing up and coming into as a young professional and into the professional, I always thought that was how it is. Whoever appoints you, you serve at their interest. So I think for a crop of directors that exercise their independence in the true sense of the word, in terms of conducting themselves in the best interest of the entity, of whatever board or governing body they are sitting on. I think if we could cross that, if we can get there, then a lot of the things that come by the wayside may fall away. If a director is able to really stand in his independence and stand for the best interest of the entity.
Okay. Steve, you want to comment?
I also really want to emphasize the role of the chair. So the practice in public enterprises at the moment, has been certainly, that the minister or government appoints the chair. That chair is then an extension of the shareholder, and by definition not independent. And that doesn't work very well. The chair really has to be the person that links with the shareholder and that communicates properly with the shareholder. And if that is simply a proxy of the minister or proxy of cabinet, it doesn't work. And the role of the chair in communicating with the shareholder is extremely important. So if you do have that independent chair, the chair would be foolhardy not to go to the minister and say, Minister, I'm very worried about the following prescriptions that seem to be coming out of government. Can we talk about it in the context of how you see it? And of course, if the minister's on a political mandate, the minister must explain why he's saying what he's saying, or she's saying what she's saying. And the chair must say, but the reality of this company is that we have to see the best interest of this company. And that dialogue is extremely important. It's not a question of a standoff where the minister says, board, you do this, and then the board comes back and says, we can't do that. There must be this process of toing and froing to explain the different positions that you find yourselves in. But the board, headed by the chair or coordinated by the chair, must continue to look at the best interest of this entity. But to understand the other stakeholder issues, including those political issues.
I love that, you know, what's coming out of this conversation is really what is at the heart of governance, and which is purpose, and like, you know, why entities exist, why a board exists, why a director is there, you know. So I think all of it then boils down to each person understanding their role and, you know, executing or exercising that well. So I think maybe since we are almost wrapping up, let me just ask, are there any questions from our audience, any comments before we do final comments and thoughts? Are we all right? Augusta, are there any online? No, okay, there aren't any questions. So maybe if you could wave a magic wand, what is that one governance reform that you would enact tomorrow? And maybe combine that where do you hope to see Namibia on the global governance, like indices in 5 years?
I think if I could wave a magic wand, I mean, we have 77 state-owned enterprises.
Sure.
77. And some are commercial, some are non-commercial, some are just, interbudgetary, is it agencies or?
Extra budgetary.
Extra budgetary.
Yeah.
So if I could wave a magic wand, it would be, it's wishful thinking, but it would just be that each of these would go back to the basics of why they were created in the first place, and just do that. Just start there, do that first, and then we can build on everything else. But the way that we have structured it, really, the 77 entities that we have, each was thoughtfully created with much detail and clear intent.
Sounds almost biblical.
With clear intent. That would be my wish, is that we just, each one of them, and of course some are doing it better than others, but that everybody goes back to the drawing book, they open their articles of association or their act and say, what should we be doing and for who should we be doing it for, and to what extent or quality. Just keep it there, and then the rest we can handle.
I like
That's
that.
my one wish.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The heart of ISO 37000. Go ahead, Ernestine.
I would probably look at it more broader, not just public enterprises, but including of the private sector, where really we have proper reform of a Companies Act, a law that is simplified. It provides guidance to all the role players in an organization, shareholders, directors, management, to actually be able to actually manage the company better, and also to be able to create an environment or a law reform that makes doing business so much easier for any organization.
Okay.
And obviously the financial impact that it has on the country. So that's what I would want to wave my magic wand and make that come true.
Yeah. Thank you. What about you, Steve?
Yeah, Etla, my magic wand would be to create a NAM code 2. A new NAM code that takes the best of
all the codes.
King 5, and some of the stuff coming out of King 5 is brilliant. ISO 37000, and then the best of the stuff that's going around the world in these alphabet soups. And really, I'll talk to the second part of your question, where do we want to be in 5 years' time? But if we could have a NAM code that is firstly Namibian, secondly African, and thirdly global, in that order, that's the priority ranking, which really addresses all of the governance challenges across private and public, all entities, all organizations, big and small. And that's utopia. But I think King 5 is getting there, by the way. I think we're getting to that point where you can have a scalable, appropriately focused code that really talks to all these different stakeholders. Where we would like to be in global metrics, I don't know, because I think we're very confused globally. And we're coming out with all of these alphabets, ISSBs, the GRI, the CSRD, and they're all fighting each other at the moment. And they're all obsessed with climate metrics and ESGs and all of that. And I think we need to crystallize it down and say what's important for Namibia, what's important for our region, and what's important out of all of that stuff globally. But a lot of it is just noise. And come up with a code that is the world's best code for Namibia. That's my dream. And the stuff that Ernestine talked about, making business easier, the Companies Act and all of that
In the
must
country as well.
dovetail obviously with
Yeah.
that. Otherwise, you still have all of those impediments.
Yeah.
But if we could do that in 12 months and have a dream NAM code that talks to all of those constituencies, I would be very happy.
Yeah. I hope Tian is listening of the stock exchange with his current NAM code. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. I don't know if there's with how much time do we have left? I think if we're still good. Thank you, everyone. Really, this was such a good conversation, and I hope our audience also enjoyed it so much. And we didn't get to talk about the fact that we are looking to see where we are at currently. We are launching a project soon that is a governance ranking. We will be looking at our members and some state-owned enterprises and looking at what is the fabric of governance in their organizations and the level of governance. And then we're going to see, we're ranking. We did this, I think, was it 2020? When did we do it? 2021? The last one that was done. So we're doing that again. So be on the lookout for that and expect to hear from us. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being here. Good night, everyone.